Hi everybody, it's Mrs. Peachy. I am doing this video tutorial on the skeletal system because we will not have biology tomorrow. I will not be here tomorrow, and I want to make sure that you guys still have every body system and have me kind of go through all of that information. So if we could just go ahead and follow along on the screen here. Let's first look at what the skeletal system does for us. Not only does it protect you, as protects a lot of your major organs inside your body and provides a framework and structure to support your body. It attaches to muscles and attaches bone to bone in order for you to be able to move. It also serves as a place to store minerals, calcium and phosphorus, and to make blood cells. So blood cells are made where bone marrow is formed in many of the larger bones of the body. And so all of these things are functions of your skeleton. We're going to go through some of the bones of the body. This does not require you to know the names of the bones of the body, so whew, you're off the hook there. There's 206 bones in the adult body, so it's a lot of information to memorize. However, it does kind of, probably a good thing for you to know some of the major ones that might impact your health as you get older, or may have already impacted your health if you've ever broken a bone before. So what are bones? A lot of people think bones are dead. They're like, like shells of a clam or an oyster, but they're not like that at all. They do have minerals in them, which makes them hard, but in fact bones are made up of living tissue. We can divide our skeleton into two main parts, the axial and appendicular skeleton. And if you look at these, basically it's just made up of, the axial skeleton is the main area right here, your skull, your vertebrae, your rib cage, and appendicular is everything else. So everything that's kind of an appendage to that. We'll talk about some bone types. We have long bones, short bones, flat bones, irregular bones, and sesamoid bones. And again, you're not going to need to know these specifically, but you will hear the terms. For example, we will look at some long bones as sites of bone marrow formation. And they have various shapes, and I'm not going to go through those because they are also in your textbook. But we'll look at some of them as we get through today's lesson. So what's bone made up of? Bone is made up of living cells and protein fibers, and it's surrounded by deposits of calcium salts, and these deposits of calcium are what gives bone its rigidity. So you've probably heard of osteoporosis before, and osteoporosis is really where bone is beginning to lose that rigidity and becomes softer. It becomes more easily broken. There are nerves and blood vessels that run through bones to provide them with the oxygen that they would need to perform cellular respiration. There are what's called compact bone and spongy bone. And compact bone is hard exterior that's composed of repeating osteons, you see here. And spongy bones does not have osteons, but has trabecula, which are basically little beams in the bone. But let's kind of look more specifically at what these mean. Okay, here's compact bones. They have these osteons, which you can kind of see as these circular formations here. Right in the middle is something called a Haversian canal. And this is basically a canal that provides nerves and blood vessels, kind of a passageway for those, to be able to supply feeling to the bone, as well as obviously a blood supply that would bring oxygen and nutrients and minerals and take away waste products. And think about it, if you break your bone, it hurts, so obviously there must be nerves inside your bone. Now, on the other hand, this is compact bone. So spongy bone you might think of as being like a sponge, and it kind of looks like a sponge, but it's really very hard also. It also has a lot of calcium deposits to make it very hard. It just has this kind of spongy texture to it, which, the question I have up here is, what advantage would that provide you as a living organism? And if you think about it for a second, come up with an idea in your mind. What advantage would spongy bone provide you as an organism? Now think about your muscles. Your muscles have to be able to support you, to carry your weight. So the bigger you are, the larger your muscles should be in order to be able to support your own body weight. So muscles require a lot of energy. They're protein, they need to be fed, lots of oxygen, lots of carbohydrates. So how do we, try to conserve energy? Well, try not to weigh as much. And one way to reduce weight is to have this type of bone structure, because they're not going to be dense, so they're still very strong, but they are able to support us without having the extra weight and less energy needed to move that. So bones are also the site of bone marrow formation. And this picture is kind of gross, actually, but it is a cut cross-section of a head of a femur. And you can kind of see the bone marrow in there. It looks kind of like I don't know, to me it looks like a gumball. But you can see the yellow and red bone marrow cells. Yellow marrow is actually a storage place for fat, which is probably why your dog likes to chew on bones. And the red bone marrow is a place where stem cells are found. And remember that stem cells can differentiate into different types of cells. So in this case, a lot of the blood cells come from the bone marrow. So you'll see like your red blood cells, and a lot of your white blood cells will come from there as well. So that's just some of the types of cells that come from the stem cells in the bone marrow. Now, not all of your body is made up of hard bone, whether that be compact or spongy. You also have a lot of cartilage in your body. Unlike bone, cartilage contains no vessels, and therefore it needs to get its energy from cellular diffusion. So typically it's not going to be exceptionally thick. It's not going to be, a big giant chunks of it, because it's going to be hard to get the food to it. As we age, we have less and less cartilage, especially when you're talking about the difference between a baby versus just an adult, right? So in an embryonic form, the body is made up of exclusively cartilage. Cartilage has the advantage of being very flexible and bendable, and so it's much easier to be able to move around and grow and flex and stuff like that when there's lots of cartilage. When a child is young, they actually still have quite a bit of cartilage. One time I remember my son really hurt his foot. He was probably about 3 years old, and I took him to the doctor, and I could have sworn he would have broken his foot. I honestly don't even remember what he did. I just remembered that I was positive he broke his foot. But the doctor then informed me that at that age, the foot bones, which in an adult would have been likely broken, were actually made of cartilage still, and therefore more easily, withstood the impact of the injury, and therefore I didn't have to worry about it. So it was very interesting. So up until about 7 months prior to birth, embryos contain all cartilage. And then a process called ossification occurs. And this is where the cells actually secrete minerals, which will harden the cartilage and turn it into bone. There's a lot of different types of cells here, and you're going to see these, but I want you to notice that the prefix for all of these begins with osteo. So even if we're talking about like osteoporosis, osteo means bone. So every time you see that, osteo, you'll know you're going to be looking at something that deals with bones. Remember too that sites at the end here refers to cell. So we have a bone cell, osteocyte, which is kind of weird because we have osteoblasts and osteoclasts too, which obviously are types of bone cells too. So osteocytes build bone or build up bone. That's their kind of their job. Osteoblasts, right here, their job is to secrete minerals in cartilage, and they actually are part of the process of ossification, which is where it goes from a flexy cartilage piece to bone. So that's actually turning into bone. And then osteoclasts, which are over here, their job is to break down old bone, recycle it so that it can be renewed and stuff like that, so that your bones kind of stay healthy. So interestingly, kind of remember that prefix, because a lot of times just remembering vocabulary in science has to do with those prefixes. So here we go, skeleton man waving at you. I like to joke that this is my son here. We call him Skeleton Boy because he's like now, I want to say he's getting up to 5'8" and still weighs only about 85 pounds, that kid. So he needs to put on some weight, growing way quicker than he is, you know, gaining weight, that's for sure. So some of the main types of bones are found in this image, and I'm just going to go ahead and move me to the top of the screen. You're going to hear of some of these, and you may have heard of them before. Each one of your arms is made up of 3 bones. You have your humerus, which isn't very funny, on the top, but you can kind of think of it because it does connect to your elbow, which is most of us call the funny bone, right? And then we have our radius, which is the larger of the two, and the ulna up here. And then your hands are made up of the carpals and metacarpals. And if you look down at the feet, those are made up of the tarsals and metatarsals. So very similar in name. The other ones you may have heard of before are like your femur, your big bone in your leg, your tibia and fibula, which are the 2 bones in your lower leg. I'm sure you've all heard of ribs and the sternum before, the skull, the vertebrae, probably, well, you might even have heard of your clavicles, which are basically your shoulder blades. They're right in the front here. And we have the patella listed, which is your kneecap. And they're also looking at the ilium, which is basically this big hip structure. And there's many, many more bones, but those are kind of some of the main ones that you might hear of as we go through this unit. Joints. Joints connect the bones together. They can be fixed, slightly movable, or freely movable. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the first 2, fixed or slightly movable. Let's quickly look at those freely movable joints. Oopsies. There we go. I wanted to just move this down a sec. Here we go. And here we have some types of joints. The pivot, like your neck turning back and forth. Ball and socket. You can rotate it all the way around. The hinge is on your elbow, right? Saddle joint allows you to kind of go, oops, where's the camera? Go like this, but also can rotate it. Actually, if that's supposed to be my finger and I'm supposed to be rotating, I'm doing a pretty poor job. Gliding. And conoloid, which is, okay, not the greatest examples in the world, but you can kind of get the idea. Remember, as you kind of get these guys mixed up, tendons connect bone to muscle, ligaments connect bone to bone. And just another example of like the tendons in your hand, right? You can see those pretty easily. If you move your fingers, you can actually feel the tendons move in response. And on the other side, same deal. These might be easier to see. I'm pretty bony, so it's easier to see on my hand sometimes than on other people's. And then remember that bones are between the joints. There's cartilage, but there's also synovial fluid. And that's why you get this lovely